Okay, so here we are with behavior part 2. This is all about communication, how animals communicate, why they communicate, all that good stuff. So the very first one says, I can define communication. And all communication is when two organisms share information by sending a signal. Now that signal could be a word. It could be something nonverbal, like a flap of the wing or a wink or a shuffle of the feet, or just different things. Different species can do all kinds of different things. It can be tactile, so it can be touching. So if you are somewhere you're not supposed to be talking, funeral, church, something like that, and you start talking, your mom might just reach over and touch you on the shoulder, just letting you know she's listening and needs you to be quiet. And then chemical as well. So there are pheromones we'll talk about. Skunks, of course, if you've ever smelled skunk spray, you know they're signaling something. So there's just a bunch of different ways that we communicate as well. So I can explain the purpose of communication. What is the purpose of all behaviors? Survival, reproduction. So that's what our behaviors are going to do, including communication. They're going to help us survive, help us help others survive, because sometimes we're feeling altruistic, and then also help us reproduce. The mating and courtship behaviors are obviously a classical example of that. Okay, the next one says, I can explain the role of a signal in communication. Well, when we're talking about communication, it's a behavior. So there's a stimulus and a response. The stimulus is the signal. So it's just another word for stimulus. Okay, so when you hear signal, don't think it's, when you think of a signal, you think of like in baseball or basketball, or the coaches send a signal or something like that. What are they doing? They are telling somebody some information because they want them to behave a certain way. They want them to run down the court or get the ball or throw the ball or whatever. And so that's all a signal is that stimulus. Okay, the next one, I can give an example of a visual cue as communication. So this could be anything like the redness of a cardinal. So the male cardinals are red. Why? Because it attracts the females. It lets her know that he's strong, because that redness is a handicap. And so if he has that redness, that means he's strong and he's overcome that handicap. He's survived. And she'll want to pass those strong genes down to her babies. Peacock tails, they'll put up their tails. And that's to show the ladies again, hey, look at my big old tail. Look at all the colors. Isn't it beautiful? This tail, it about gets me killed every day. And yet here I am still alive. So I must be super strong. Don't you want me to be your baby daddy, basically, in peacock language. So those are some examples of visual ones. If you've ever gone outside in the spring when mockingbirds, because we do have those here, are mating, if you get anywhere near their nest, and I mean anywhere near, I don't mean really close, they are super territorial. They will dive bomb at your head. They'll flash the white inside of their wings, and that's a warning to you to stay away from their babies. They can be pretty nasty. I've seen them go after cats, like dive bomb cats. Like, do you not know that cat could eat you? But whatever. I can give an example of an auditory cue as communication. This is everything from bird songs to trumpets of an elephant to roars of a lion, obviously humans talking, crying. Think about a baby. How do they communicate? They cry a lot, right? Because they don't have anywhere else to tell you what they need. So those are some auditory ones. The next is tactile, so touching. We saw this again in the elephant videos. They would rub against each other. They would tusk each other. They would swing their head or their trunk. They would kick. Some of these were aggressive. Some of them were not. You think about cats. If you have a pet cat, how they'll come and soothe against your leg. They'll smooth you. Dogs will come and nudge you with their hand, or they'll lick you. All of that's tactile. And then electrical, this is really not going to be something we see with us too much, but electrical, like electric eels, electric fish. There's actually these electric fish that have an electric duet that they sing. And I use that term very loosely because they're not making a sound. But this fish sends out some electricity like boop, boop, boop. And then this one goes boop, boop, boop. And then they kind of boop, boop back and forth. So they're doing it with electricity instead of sound, but it's almost like a song. And then chemical cues, I've already mentioned before, pheromones. Ants use these a lot. When an ant finds food and he's going back to the nest, he drops pheromones, or releases pheromones, is probably a better way to say it, so that the other ants can then follow that trail back to the food. We see this in bees as well, termites, any of those where you have the queen and a bunch of workers, you see the pheromones big time. Humans have pheromones. You're communicating with people around you all the time and don't even realize it because of the pheromones that you're putting out. Okay, I can explain the purpose of mating and courtship behaviors. That's an easy one, right? Mating and courtship behaviors are all about reproduction. So remember, behaviors have two reasons: survival and or reproduction. Mating behaviors are all about reproduction. They don't really help you much with survival. If anything, they draw attention to you. So if there's a predator around and you're doing a mating dance or singing a courtship song, you're drawing attention to yourself. So it's probably going to decrease survival, if anything, but it's going to increase your chance of mating. I can explain the role of natural selection and the increase in behaviors that increase survival and reproductive fitness. Okay, if I'm a squirrel and I'm running around, trying to pick up acorns or whatever, and I have a behavior that makes me fearless. I have what genetic or learned, whatever, that makes me fearless. Probably genetic, probably mutation. And I just go running out in the road because I don't care about those cars. I'm probably going to get squished, and I'm probably not going to pass that behavior down to my kids. So that would be an example of how natural selection is going to maybe prevent that behavior from hanging around, versus another squirrel who's hyper intuitive and listening around for cats and other predators, hawks and whatever, and they're going to be really in tune to their environment, still getting their acorns, still getting their food, but they're more likely to survive, and therefore they're going to pass down that kind of being in tune with everything behavior, whether it's genetic or learned. Either one, they can pass it down. All right, I can differentiate between innate and learned behaviors. Innate behaviors are those you're born knowing. They are genetic. Mammals suckle, we grasp. Those are two things. We squint when the lights are bright. Those are some things we are born knowing how to do. Birds singing their songs. I'm trying to think of other innate behaviors. Birds imprinting on their, and not just birds singing their songs. There's other things like crickets and stuff. All of that, their mating, courtship things are all innate. Learned behaviors are things you learn after birth. And if nobody teaches them to you, you don't learn them. So things like tying your shoes, language, walking, although you probably would figure that one out, but you would still have to learn it. Like, you're not born knowing how to walk, and you're not strong enough when you're born. In other animals, learned behaviors might be, think about, again, cats and dogs. Your cat might know the sound of the treat bag. And so when you go to give them treats, you haven't even gotten it out of the cabinet hardly, and here comes meow, 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 right? Or with the dog, they hear the can opener and they come running because they know they're about to get fed, or the bag the food's in, or whatever. Those are learned behaviors. We're going to talk about a lot of learned behaviors, so I'm not going to hang out there for too long. I can define migration and give its evolutionary purpose. Migration is, let's see if I can find the slide, because it's just better when you can see pictures. Migration is, maybe I find it, when you are moving, here we go, from one area to another over long distances. We see this a lot between the summer and the winter. So things will go south for the winter because it's warmer. And then in the summer, they go back north because it's not so hot. So they kind of, and the good news is they now have two locations that they can get food and resources. The bad news is they are relying on both of those locations. And so if something happens to either one, they can be in peril, they can be in danger. A lot of this is innate. So for example, salmon or salmon, that's something you say. I say the L. Think in Alaska. Okay, the salmon are born in a freshwater stream. They go to the ocean. They do all their living life business, all that out in the ocean. They come back up the stream. This is when you see them jumping and the bears catching them. They go back up the stream to where they were born, to almost the exact location that they were born. And they do this by scent, and they think some other maybe like geomagnetic things. But anyway, they go back to almost the exact location they were born. They spawn. So she releases her eggs. He drops his sperm over them, and then the parents die. And as their bodies decompose, that releases a lot of nutrients into the water that are then available to their children. Just kind of gross, but that's how it is. So that's a migration, because they're starting in one location, they're going to another, and then they're coming back. And they don't eat once they leave the ocean. So once they have to fatten up in the ocean, get a lot of fat stores so that they can make it all the way back up to where they were born. So that's migration. And the purpose of it is to increase their chances of finding food and mates and all of that. because if they stayed in the cold, like butterflies or birds or something, they could potentially freeze and they'll die. So by going to the warm, and a lot of them will mate and have babies when they're in the warm. So they'll mate and have babies in the southern areas. Okay. I can define foraging behavior. Foraging behavior, to forage means to find food. So the next time you're in the cabinet digging through, looking for a snack, and your mom says, "What are you doing?" You say, "I'm foraging," and you'll sound really smart. But foraging behavior, I thought that was one of these slides right here. But anyway, foraging behavior is behavior that, of course, is for survival because you're getting food. And it is behavior that you innately know to go find food, but sometimes you have to learn how. So moms, I say moms because particularly like in most species, the moms are the ones doing the care, if there is any care. For example, with bears, the mom is going to teach the bears how to hunt. Okay. And so that foraging behavior is kind of a mix of innate and learned. All right, I can define habituation. So now we're getting into learned behaviors. Habituation is, think about it as like a habit, okay? Once you do something a lot of times, it becomes a habit and you don't think about it. Habituation is when you're exposed to something and you're not sure if it's a threat, so you pay attention to it. And then once you realize it's not a threat, you learn to ignore it. White noise is a great example of this. When you first hear white noise, it actually can elevate your blood pressure, your heart rate, those kinds of things. But once you realize that's not dangerous, it's not doing anything, it's just there, you will start to ignore it. And then you will, and you think about this on a car trip, like that road noise. After a while, you just begin to ignore it because it's not providing any benefit, nor is it any harm. And so you can lose your responsiveness to it. So it's still there, the stimulus, the noise is still there, or the whatever, noise is the best example, but you've learned to not respond. You shut off that behavior. That's habituation. All right, imprinting. Imprinting is learning plus innate. So innately, birds know to imprint on something during this sensitive period of their life. Okay, and so that's the innate part of it. What they imprint on is the learned part. And so after a certain point after hatching, whatever the birds see, that's what they imprint on. So that is what they will consider to be their parent, and they will follow it. Now, why would this be a good thing? Because the birds, by following mama, because that's probably who they're going to imprint on, because that's normally who they see during this sensitive period, her job is to protect and make sure they get food, protect those babies and make sure they get food. So if they stay close to mama, if they stay where they can see her, they're more likely to survive to adulthood. And so that's the benefit of that. And that's evolutionary purpose. Habituation, I didn't talk about its evolutionary purpose. It is to not waste energy, because once you realize something's not a danger, you don't need to waste energy responding to it, because wasting energy can lead to death if you waste too much energy. Okay, I can define spatial learning. Spatial learning is those of you that are really good at picturing things in your head, like you can picture the town of Lexington, and if I needed to go from White Knoll to, I don't know, Mose in downtown Lexington, you could in your head kind of picture the pathway you would take to get there, okay? Or from Lexington or River Bluff or whatever to Mose. If you can't do that, then you don't have good spatial abilities, but that's what spatial means. It's like being able to manipulate space, as in like a map, in your mind. And so spatial learning is where organisms learn their surroundings and they use that information to decrease their energy output. And what I mean by that is, if a mama bird or whatever, in this case, I think there's another, or this is a wasp. Okay, this wasp leaves its nest. It knows that its nest is in the center of these pine cones, trees, bushes, shrubs, whatever. And that way it knows every time it comes back, I go there. It doesn't have to search for that nest every time. It doesn't have to smell out that nest every time. Again, all of that's using energy. So it's saving energy by doing that. But, and they did this experiment, they moved the pine cones and then the wasp went to the wrong place because it was using those almost like landmarks. And that's a big thing about spatial learning, is using landmarks, because again, it decreases your energy output, which increases your chance of survival. And the reason it decreases your energy output is because you're not having to spend a lot of time going back to and using your other senses and flying all around and trying to find it. You can go straight to it. Okay, I can define associative learning. Okay, associative learning is when you associate one thing with another. Okay, let's say, well, let's not say, back when I was a junior in high school, I think I got food poisoning from a pretty famous, popular, not famous, popular Italian chain. I ate spaghetti, got food poisoning. I could not eat spaghetti. I could not eat anything red at that restaurant for probably 10 or 15 years because I associated red sauce at that particular restaurant. I could eat spaghetti other places, but at that particular restaurant with 24 hours of wanting to die, right? Because if you've ever had food poisoning, you know it's bad. It's not fun. So I associated those two things together. They aren't naturally associated. You wouldn't normally associate red sauce at an Italian restaurant with vomiting, right? You don't normally do that. But so that's an example of associative learning. Eventually I was able to break that association, but that's what associative learning is. And it creates a shortcut. If we know something is bad for us, we've tasted that mushroom and we got really sick afterwards, then we avoid that mushroom. And I'm talking like I'm a bird here or a raccoon or whatever eats mushrooms. I'm going to avoid that mushroom because it made me sick last time. By making that association and decreasing my response to that or decreasing that chance, then I am less likely to get sick again. Being sick makes me vulnerable, but also I could get so sick that the sickness kills me, or if it's a toxin or poison in the mushroom, then it could kill me just by eating more of it. So associations there can be really good for survival. Also reproduction, because you can associate different things with strong mates, like the red color of a cardinal, the big tail on a peacock, those kinds of things. All right, we're going to break this down into two types, classical conditioning and operant. Classical conditioning is where organism number one creates an association for organism number two. So Pavlov's dogs are the best example of this. So Pavlov was a human. He had dogs, and every time he fed his dogs, he rang a bell. Okay. So what he was doing is he was creating this association in the dogs of the bell means food. So then after he did it for, I don't know how long, a couple days, couple weeks, ringing that bell, every time he fed them, then he would ring the bell and it would make them salivate, even if there was no food around. So they would start to salivate because they knew that food was associated with that bell. So Pavlov, a human, created that association for this other organism, the dogs. That's classical condition. Operant conditioning is where I create that association myself. Okay, like this poor little coyote or whatever it is here. He chased after a porcupine. He's got a face full of quills. He probably not going to chase after a porcupine anymore. Okay, he made that association himself. He got a face full of porcupines because he was chasing a porcupine. He's probably not going to ever chase a porcupine again because he knows that's not good. Here, this is an experiment with a little mouse or rat. Push the lever, get a treat. What's that mouse going to do? He's going to keep pushing that lever, keep getting those treats. We do this with kids all the time. We say, good job, or we punish them, put them in timeout because we're trying to help them associate certain behaviors with certain treats or punishments, right? Or reward, verbal rewards, encouragement. So that's operant conditioning. Trial and error is another example of this. Let's say that you are trying to bake a certain cake that your mom likes. You're trying to make it for Mother's Day and you bake it 12 times. And finally, number 12 is right. You got it right. All of those trials and errors and tweaks that you made because you didn't get it right the first 11 times, that is you creating this association with these ingredients in this order and get this perfect cake. All right. I can define cognition. Cognition is a higher level of thinking. It's reasoning, it's awareness, it's being able to judge situations, it's being able to to recall, to have recollection, so you can recall, remember things. And it's really crucial to problem solving. And problem solving is not something we see in all organisms. Not every organism can problem solve. Crows, super smart birds. I know they don't really look like it, but they are really smart. They're some of the smartest birds out there, and they know how to problem solve. Of course, the apes, the great apes especially, have the ability to problem solve. Anything that can use a tool has figured out some problem solving. Some things are really good problem solvers. Some are just barely problem solvers. So there's different ways for that. Evolutionary purpose, obviously, if you can solve a problem using a tool, you get more food, you have a better chance of survival. And again, all of these behaviors, it goes back to that survival and reproduction every single time. Okay, I can define cooperative behavior. Cooperative behavior means you're cooperating, you are working together to achieve a goal. And that goal may be survival or that goal may be reproduction, but you're working together to achieve that goal. The predator warnings are an example of this. Oh, there's foraging. Anyway, what else? That's probably the best example I can think of. Well, no, because you've got ants and bees. So that's cooperating, building the hive or the nest and bringing food back for the whole group. Those are cooperative behaviors that are increasing the survival of others in your population other than just yourself. And why is that beneficial? Because those others in your population probably share some of your genes. And the whole point of surviving and reproducing is for your genes to continue. So if you can make your cousins help your cousins survive, then maybe not all of your genes are going to continue, but they have some of your genes. And so if they survive and reproduce, at least some of your genes are going to continue on. All right. I can define altruism. Altruism is selfless behavior. It is doing something that will benefit me not at all, but it will benefit other people. Giving money to charity is probably the best example I can think of with humans. Doing free tutoring, something like that would be altruistic. It does reduce your fitness because like the one that does the predator call, that's an example. If I'm yelling, hey, there's a predator coming, guess who else hears that besides my people? The predator. So it could reduce my fitness, it could increase my chance of dying, but it increases the overall survivability of the population. And so I'm willing to sacrifice myself for the greater good. And there are two types we're going to talk about: inclusive fitness and kin selection. Inclusive fitness is more broad. It's, hey, let's keep the whole population alive because I'm probably kin to everybody in this population. So I'm going to do everything I can to not only keep my offspring alive, but everyone else's offsprings as well. And then kin selection is when you are, it's like inclusive fitness, but it's really just your family. So you're trying to keep those close relatives alive. Because you want to increase, again, because your close relatives are going to share more genes in common with you. And so it's all about survival and reproduction. But with altruism and these types of fitness here, it's not necessarily about your survival and reproduction. It's about your family's survival and reproduction because they will pass down some of your genes if they survive. Obviously, organisms still want to survive and reproduce on their own, but this is kind of like a backup plan. Okay. And that's it. That's a lot, but it's communication, innate versus learned behaviors, all different types. I mean, all of these from, what was the first one? Habituation on were learned. So lots and lots of learned behaviors that we talked about. But I hope that helps. If you have questions, let me know.